Until the ground beneath our boots detonated with buried mines no one had mentioned. Until our comms went silent within 10 minutes of landing. Until the tree line erupted with muzzle flashes, and we realized we weren't there to retrieve anyone. We were bait, and someone had made sure we were disposable. I remembered carrying Alvarez through the ravine, blood soaking into my side, from where the shrapnel had entered. I remembered dragging Ruiz by his vest until my knees collapsed. I remembered crawling through mud I couldn't even see, because the night vision lenses were cracked from the blast. And I remembered one clear thought screaming through all of it. No one is coming for us. But I didn't tell the tribunal any of that. Not yet, because those memories weren't ammunition. They were testimony, and I needed more than just pain to stand on. I needed proof. So I spent every night after I came back combing through malfunctioning radio logs, corrupted GPS tracks, and drone telemetry that didn't align. Something about the official mission timeline never made sense, and if I was going to speak again, if I was going to answer my father's accusation, it wouldn't be with tears or anger. It would be with facts sharp enough to cut through military silence. It started with a 30-minute gap. According to the official mission log, our boots touched ground at 2100 hours. But I remember checking my watch the moment we dropped. The glowing dial read 2031, and I never forgot that detail. Not because I was obsessive, because it was the last calm moment before everything went dark. The discrepancy ate at me, not just because it was a mistake, but because it was a mistake no one seemed interested in correcting. 30 minutes isn't a typo. It's a cover. I pulled the black box logs from the recovered comms unit, a habit I picked up in my early deployment days. Field units save more than we're told. And sure enough, embedded deep in the corrupted file structure was a block of raw data timestamps, radio pings, even altitude readings from the surveillance drone that had supposedly gone offline. The mission was recorded as beginning at 2100, but our drone was already in hover at 20-36, mapping heat signatures and terrain grids, and then at exactly 20-55, all telemetry went dead. What came next? Mine detonations, gunfire, loss of signal. None of it existed in the official archive. It had been cut, clean, like surgery. I stared at the screen for hours that night in my quarters, the faint glow of encrypted maps casting flickers onto the walls. The pattern was too precise, too intentional. If this had been a failure of tech, there'd be chaos in the logs, overlapping signals, error codes, scrambled feeds. But this was silence. The kind you program on purpose. I forwarded the fragments to Admiral Rawls through a secure channel. I didn't include a message. I knew he'd understand what the files were saying louder than any words I could write. The next morning, he called me in. He stood at the window, his back to me, the Capitol dome faintly visible through the office glass. When he turned, he didn't ask if I was sure. He just said, "Keep going." That's when I knew he'd seen something like this before. With his clearance, I accessed the mission's contracting trail layers of subcontractors, software developers, logistics vendors. One name appeared repeatedly in the system's protocol request, Form's Vanguard Edge, a private defense contractor specializing in adaptive drone technologies. I'd heard the name once before. My father had mentioned them in passing years ago. They're the future, he'd said. Less blood, more data. I didn't understand it then. But now, with a rifle barrel's worth of silence buried in my chest, I did. That night, an email came to my encrypted inbox. No sender name. Just a string of numbers and a subject line, Field Variable U. My heart kicked once hard. I opened the file. Inside was a voice memo. Male, mid-30s, maybe voice rough and nervous. They used your team lieutenant. You were the baseline for a live algorithm test. Predictive combat mapping. We were ordered to pull intel, falsify terrain stability, and monitor drone response times during actual ambush conditions. You were never supposed to win. You were supposed to trigger outcomes. I froze. Trigger outcomes. The breath left my lungs like I'd been hit again. And for the first time since crawling out of that jungle alive, I wasn't just angry. I was ready. I met Admiral Rawls at an off-the-record location, a small conference room buried 3 levels below the main wing of the Naval Operations Center. No security detail, no protocol. Just him, me, and the unrelenting hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He gestured for me to sit. I placed the encrypted drive on the table between us. I brought everything I said. Comm logs, time gaps, drone positioning data, and this. I slid the auxiliary recorder forward. It held the voice of the anonymous Vanguard engineer. The man who had finally admitted the truth. Rawls didn't speak. He just pressed play. The voice came through thin but steady, every word a nail driven into the polished oak of that table. We were told your squad was ideal, tight formation. High adaptability, zero prior drone exposure. Clean conditions for controlled escalation. They said losses were acceptable as long as the telemetry was clean. Rawls let it run until the very end, then silence. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed into slits. He looked like a man who'd swallowed barbed wire and was trying to keep it down. This doesn't stop at Vanguard, he said finally. Someone had to approve the test from inside. I nodded. I traced the authorization chain I told him. One of the last digital signatures on the Vanguard engagement contract came from a retired strategic advisor. Marcus Denton, my father. Rawls didn't react, not at first, but his fingers tapped twice on the edge of the table reflex, not habit. That was when I knew he'd already suspected it. He was still consulting, he asked. Unofficially. Paper trail's thin. But he lobbied for the drone program 5 years ago, claimed it would revolutionize asymmetrical warfare. And now I looked him straight in the eye. Now it's rewritten the rules of sacrifice. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of betrayal clawing at the air between us. I hated that I even had to say his name in this context. Hated that a man who once taught me to field strip a rifle blindfolded might be the same man who signed off on the mission that nearly ended my life. But I couldn't afford to be the daughter right now. I had to be the witness. Rawls reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a folder. Classified markings still sealed. I've been waiting for confirmation, he said quietly. This ties it. He slid the file toward me. Inside were internal memos, Vanguard comms, cross-referenced with active drone telemetry, labeling our squad as Group Beta Live Control. We weren't just in the field. We were the test. They called us variables, I whispered. Rawls nodded grimly. And they calculated your deaths into their margins. The air shifted. No anger, no drama. Just the cold, suffocating stillness of realization. I stared down at the page in front of me. And in that moment, I made a decision. We need a tribunal, I said. Formal, not internal. I'm going to testify. Rawls met my gaze. You sure you're ready for that? No, I answered. But that's never stopped me before. I drove to his house the next evening, just as the sky was turning the color of bruised steel. The porch light was already on, though I hadn't called ahead. Somehow I knew he'd be expecting me. The door opened before I could knock. He didn't smile, just stepped aside and let me in, like we were still strangers who shared blood and uniform, but not trust. His study was the same as always, lined with framed commendations and shadow boxes of medals. A flag folded into a perfect triangle sat on the mantel, and beside it a photo of us the day I was commissioned. I'd forgotten he even kept it. He didn't offer me a seat, and I didn't wait for one. Did you know I asked? No preamble, no ceremony. His eyes flicked toward mine, then away. I knew Vanguard had proposals and testing, but I didn't know they'd use live squads. He said it like a man rehearsing a half-truth. Carefully spaced, emotionally neutral. You signed off on those contracts. I signed off on simulations, he said, sharper now. Training environments, controlled spaces, nothing involving real deployment. I took a step forward, feeling the pressure building behind my ribs. Then explain why your name is on the clearance form for Operation Silent Quarry. Explain why the approval trail runs straight through the advisory board you chaired. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence between us stretched like wire pulled tight across a minefield. You were always reckless with protocol, he muttered like an old reflex. Always too emotional in the field. No, I said, voice low but steady. I was loyal. I was the one who dragged 2 bleeding men out of that jungle while metal tore through my lungs. His jaw clenched. I stepped closer. They used us, Dad. We weren't soldiers. We were metrics. And you, whether you meant to or not, you handed them the damn yardstick. He finally looked at me, and for the first time there was something human in his face. Not regret. Not yet. But the flicker of it. Like a man standing at the edge of a truth he couldn't outrun anymore. I never wanted this, he said. And yet I replied, here we are. I turned to leave, and behind me, he didn't stop me. He didn't say my name. He just let the door close with a quiet final click. The tribunal chamber was colder than I remembered. Steel walls, no windows, just rows of uniforms, medals, and eyes that had been trained to weigh truth without showing it. I stood at the center podium spine, straight breath measured. Admiral Rawls sat to my left, my father to the far right, uninvited but present. No one asked him to speak, no one told him to leave. He wore civilian clothes, but the stiffness in his shoulders told me the uniform never really left. The presiding officer gave a nod. "You may proceed, Lieutenant Denton." I connected the encrypted drive to the console, and the first images flashed across the screen: drone flight paths, mission timestamps, comms logs. I walked them through the gap. Official reports state we deployed at 2100. Our boots hit the ground at 2031. 30 minutes of unaccounted operations. That's not a delay, that's deletion. I clicked again. Comms cut at 2055. No distress signals, no backup. The telemetry log shows the drone hovering directly over our ambush zone during the entire event. Its cameras weren't malfunctioning. They were recording. Several officers exchanged glances. One scribbled something quickly into a file. I let the room breathe. Then played the recording. The engineer's voice came through clearly, almost calm this time. They said Denton's squad had just the right cohesion rate. Mid-ranking officer, high survival instinct, no prior exposure to Vanguard tech. Prime variable control for a live scenario. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the back row. I turned back to the panel. They called us control data. Not soldiers, not people. And those orders didn't come from nowhere. I pulled up the contract archive. Highlighted the section with the clearance signatory. Marcus Denton, retired colonel, strategic advisor. Clearance authorized 6 months before Silent Quarry. Same clearance level used to activate Vanguard's live drone field protocol. The room tensed. But I didn't look at him, not yet. One of the officers leaned forward. "Lieutenant Denton, are you alleging deliberate manipulation of a combat operation under Department of Defense oversight?" "I'm alleging," I said calmly, "that 5 names went into that jungle. Only 4 came back, and no one asked why. Because no one wanted to know. Finally, I looked at my father. I dragged those men through blood and trees, while shrapnel tore through my lungs. And when I made it back, you stood in this same room and called me useless." His jaw moved once, but no words followed. The chair cleared her throat. "You've proposed a reform measure." "Lieutenant," I nodded. "I'm calling for a new clause in operational policy. No contractor shall execute or simulate combat scenarios involving live personnel without full chain of command authorization from active duty field officers, not consultants, not advisors." I paused. "Call it what you want. I call it the Denton Clause." The room stilled, and then my father stood. He didn't move quickly. His knees creaked like the weight had caught up to him. But he stepped forward, hands shaking slightly. "I need to speak," he said. No one stopped him. He looked at the council, then at me. I signed that contract thinking it was theoretical, that it would save lives in the long term. I didn't know they'd use my daughter's team to test it. He turned to me. "You carried your men out of hell while I sat behind papers. I was wrong, not just about the mission, about you." He sat back down, a quiet collapse of a man whose convictions had finally cracked. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence did it for me. The day after the tribunal ruling, I woke up in a hospital room. Not because I was injured, but because for the first time since the ambush, I had allowed the weight of it all to settle. My body shut down for 12 straight hours. The kind of sleep that doesn't rest you, just shields you from thought. When I opened my eyes, Admiral Rawls was there, standing by the window, with a folded sheet of paper in his hand. "It's official," he said. "The Denton Clause passed. Effective immediately. Vanguard's contracts are suspended pending criminal review." I nodded, but the words felt far away. "And him," I asked. "Your father's agreed to testify before the Oversight Committee. Voluntarily, he won't run." I didn't say thank you. I wasn't ready. That afternoon I was released. I walked back to my quarters alone, no uniform, just jeans, boots, and a sweatshirt that smelled like bleach. Everything felt sharper somehow. The sky too bright, the wind too clean. Inside, I stood in front of the mirror and lifted my shirt. The scars were still there, of course. Faintly purple now, the swelling gone, but the shape unchanged, jagged, unforgiving. reminders of a night no one would ever fully understand. But for the first time, I didn't hate them. They weren't just wounds anymore. They were documentation. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a report not for command, not for court, but for myself. A line-by-line debrief. What we did, what failed, what should have never been allowed. I ended it with a single sentence. Honor isn't blind loyalty. It's what you do when the truth costs everything. I signed it, closed the file, and encrypted it into my personal archive. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Naval Academy. They asked if I would consider returning, not to deploy, not to train, but to teach. Ethics in combat technology, decision-making in compromised intel. They wanted someone who had seen the worst and still stood up. I said yes. Not because I wanted the podium, but because I wanted the next generation to know some scars are survival, not shame. That night, I slept in uniform pants and a hoodie. I kept the window cracked so the wind could find me. And when I woke, I didn't feel hollow. I felt steady, like the truth had finally found enough space inside me to stay. The lecture hall was quiet, but not out of respect. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something shifts. I stood behind the podium wearing standard khakis, no ribbons, no rank flair, just the truth. I placed my hand over the scars beneath my ribs. These, I said, aren't proof that I was brave. They're proof that someone lied. A few cadets froze mid-note. I let the silence hang. They called us variables, controlled conditions. But real people bled in that jungle. I carry them with me, every name, every cry. I told them what my father never admitted until it was too late, that loyalty without clarity is just blindness. And then I told them why I came back, to ensure